last week we looked at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Alhamdulillah, and the events surrounding that, the events that led up to that. And now, inshallah, we'll be looking at one major and significant battle, so to say, that took place after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So, just to remind ourselves again about this treaty, this peace treaty, so to say, this truce, was between the Muslims and the Quraysh. This happened in the 6th year after the Hijrah, soon after the Battle of the Trench, the Battle of Khandaq, Ahzab. And this peace treaty was the very first agreement, was the very first truce, so to say, between the Muslims and Quraysh. Because remember, from the time that Muhammad started preaching publicly and giving da'wah publicly, the Quraysh were persecuting and going after the Nabi Muhammad and attacking the Muslims. And now, after 6 years after the Hijrah, there's some sort of peace, there's some sort of calm. So it was a very significant point in the life of the Muslims and the life of Islam at that moment. The points or the conditions of the treaty did not seem too favorable to the Muslims to begin with, because how it initially happened was in the 6th year, the Nabi Muhammad had a dream that the Muslims would perform Umrah. And so the Nabi with all the Ashab, they marched down to Mecca with the intention of performing Umrah, but they were stopped by the Quraysh army. And so they could not perform Umrah that year, and one of the conditions was that they would come back the next year to perform Umrah with swords sheathed and no weapons, no intention to fight. They were only allowed to stay for 3 or 4 days maximum in the city, and if any Muslim left to join Quraysh, they would be allowed to come back. If any Qurayshi left to join the Muslims, they would have to be forced to return back to Quraysh. So it didn't seem very favorable to the Muslims at the time. However, because of this treaty, and one of the, maybe at the time, to the Sahaba at least, unseen blessings there was there was a 10-year truce. No fighting, no stealing, no conflict, guaranteed for 10 years. And this allowed the Muslims, it favored the Muslims, not perhaps when military was concerned in the fight against Quraysh, but this 10-year peace between Quraysh, who was possibly the number one threat and has been the greatest persecutor for all this time, it gave the Muslims breathing space to focus on other strategies and on other areas that needed attention. And so one such area, which is a very famous battle that we might know of, is that of the Battle of Khaybar. So to just give some background regarding Khaybar, the Jewish tribes of Khaybar. There were several Jewish tribes that were in this city, the stronghold fortress of Khaybar. The most notable of them being Banu Nadir, which, if we remember, had been this entire tribe previously expelled from the city of Medina because they betrayed the Nabi Muhammad. And they had a plan, had tried to plot to kill the Nabi Muhammad. And as such, they broke that peace. They broke that peace treaty agreement and were expelled and they moved to the city of Khaybar to join the other Jewish tribes. But Khaybar, apart from being known as a stronghold for Jews, it was also an area known for its wealth and its fertile land and the buildings and structures that were used as strong defenses for fortresses. So the Jewish tribes in Khaybar, they had been instigators against the Muslims from the start. They were aligning themselves with Quraysh and other anti-Muslim tribes in the Arabian Peninsula since the beginning, right? And the most recent and major battle was the Battle of the Trench, which just took place the year before. And the Battle of the Trench, just to touch up on that again, was Quraysh and 3 or 4 other tribes with Jewish support against the Muslims who were defending the city of Medina. And then still the Jewish tribes that were within the city of Medina were not helping the Muslims fight against these attackers, and they even betrayed the Muslims and broke that agreement. So the Jews at that time were known for their treacherous nature and could not be trusted. So now they gathered, or there were a lot of them now in the city of Khaybar, which was a known strong fortress and had wealth that could be capitalized on. And you know, the Muslims still growing, still emerging as a superpower, if you want to call it or view it like that. Still, you know, growing, surrounded by these other so-called well-established tribes and communities. Khaybar served as a military threat to the Muslims and the community, and the Muslim community in the city of Medina. Not only because of Khaybar's wealth and power, but also because of the alliances that Khaybar had with other Arab tribes. And it was also an economic rival to the city of Medina, because we know Medina is famous for its dates and its springs and its fertile land, but Khaybar just as much. And great dates and lots of fertile land that they could use to cultivate for crops. So, Al-Qurayza was coming back to the Battle of the Trench, where I mentioned that there were Jewish tribes that had betrayed the Muslims. Al-Qurayza was one such tribe that had broken the agreement with the Muslims back in Medina in the year before. And they were executed or exiled because of that betrayal, of course. Right? And that was only one incident that further intensified this tension between the Muslims and other Jewish tribes. So, thankfully, that peace treaty agreement with Quraysh happened. And now that there's peace and calm between the Muslims and Quraysh, the Prophet's strategy at that time, in the late 6th year of Hijrah and the early 7th year of the Hijrah, the Prophet was trying to consolidate control around the city of Medina, to protect the city of Medina, to make sure that an event like the Battle of the Trench does not happen again, of course. And so alliances were made with smaller tribes in the area, and plans were set in motion to now deal with this threat of Khaybar. So diplomacy in the area was established, but also the strategic importance of Khaybar was that Khaybar as an enemy had to be neutralized at some point or another. And now was the time, because they were no longer in threat from Quraysh and attacking them, and they were forming alliances and doing another battle of the trench. So Khaybar was now, the opportunity to take Khaybar was now. And it would also ensure that no future battles or future conspiracies against Muslims could happen. Economically speaking as well, Medina has fertile soil. If the Muslims also controlled Khaybar, it would more than double the wealth and the food security for the Muslims and ensure the protection and longevity for the Muslim community, and they would have the resources to fund any other expeditions that the Muslims would undertake, because they are this growing state, they are this still young, still growing, still vibrant community that needs all these resources, So, the action that went against this Jewish city of Khaybar happened in the month of Safar, in the 7th year after the Hijrah, right? And even though Quraysh and Khaybar, the Jews of Khaybar, were known to have alliances, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah did not stop the Muslims or Quraysh from, perhaps attacking those that the Muslims and Quraysh had alliances with. It was just between the Muslims and Quraysh. So even despite this peace between Quraysh, the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, they received reports, because it's still kind of wartime, they're still fighting. So spies and information was valuable. And they received reports that Khaybar was preparing to attack the Muslims, or preparing to instigate some sort of uprising against the Muslims. And this was not just amongst the Jews themselves, but there was talk in the town that Khaybar was also forming coalitions with other Arab tribes that had things against the Muslims. And so the timing was of the essence. And the Prophet ﷺ was Muslims who now focus on claiming Khaybar, eliminating this threat and eliminating any other threats from other tribes that might be surrounding Medina that they might not be aware of. And that's also just a part of the foreseeable economic benefits from capturing Khaybar's land. So Khaybar, oh, it was not a quick and easy battle. It was a siege, basically, that lasted over a week, even 2 weeks, some reports go. And Khaybar was heavily fortified. There were, according to some reports, 8 fortresses scattered throughout the region of Khaybar. And each fort, each small castle, so to say, had its own defenses and food supplies and garrisons and armies and weapons. So it wasn't going to be a one-day thing. It was going to be over time that the Muslims would take over Khaybar. The two most formidable and the largest of those forts were called An-Natat and Qams, just so that we know when and where the battle ended. So the Jews of Khaybar were not, as we might stereotypically assume, wealthy and good with business and economics. But the Jews of Khaybar were also known for their military prowess. There was one such soldier, warrior, who was known by the name of Balha, and he led a well-organized army. And he was really known for his combat and his strength in battle. He was unmatched compared to any of the other soldiers and warriors of Khaybar. But he was also known in the Arabian Peninsula that Balha, he was this guy that did not want to meet in battle. He was basically like a Khalid ibn Walid from Khaybar, or Umar ibn Khattab from Khaybar. He was known for his, battle strength. And apart from the Jews of Khaybar having their own military might, they also had support from mercenaries and allies of other Arab tribes. So really this undertaking, this expedition was going to be a big one. And so the Muslims had obviously prepared, they had to prepare a lot for this. And the Prophet Muhammad only prepared and assembled an army of 1,400 to 1,600 men. Relatively small, considering the fact that they were to raid 8 fortresses. And mind you, Khaybar is 150 kilometers north of Medina. So only less than 2,000 men going north 150 kilometers. Of that, 1,400 to 1,600, only about 200 of them were cavalry, only 200 of them were horses. So, despite this relatively small number of Muslims, compared to previous expeditions and campaigns, the Muslim forces were still highly experienced from previous battles, and they were much better organized because it was a battle of Uhud. The other military raising expeditions between the two leading up to this one, and then lastly the battle of Ahzab, the battle of the Tanj. The Muslims had significant experience that they gathered over these 6 years leading up to the battle of the siege of Khaybar. And still, only 6 years to develop an army that could lay siege to an entire city. They were still only equipped with basic arms, swords, shields, spears, arrows, bows, and they had some siege equipment like battering rams and ladders to breach the walls and fortifications. An army of 1,500, let's say, is still kind of large and has to be maneuvered quite well. And anyone can see them coming along from a distance away. So, if you're in a big fort and you can see out into the distance, the only way that you'll ever be taken over or raided is by surprise. If you're taken by surprise. And that is the tactic that the Prophet with the companions employed. They maintained strict secrecy regarding the target of this campaign. Nobody knew that the Muslims were going to go attack Khaybar. Nobody knew when or where or how only those who knew. And so the Muslim army they set out from Medina swiftly and as stealthily as possible, moving into the kind of darkness, um, during the night so that they wouldn't be detected by Khaybar or its forces. Because the goal was to surprise the enemy, surprise Khaybar before they could even call for reinforcements of the alliances that they had with other Arab tribes in the area. So Khaybar also was not forces that fortresses that were next door to each other. They were quite spread out over a large area. And as we said, each had their own defenses and supplies. So they could survive the siege for a period of time. And the landscape also was rocky outcrop, so it would be kind of difficult to assault. But one of the tactics that they employed, we will get to in a moment. But obviously, not all the forts were the same size. The Muslims targeted the smaller ones and then eventually brought themselves up to target the big ones. As we mentioned, Al-Natat and Al-Qamus, they were the larger ones, and the smaller forts were the names of Da'in and Al-Sa'ib and Ibn Mu'ad. They were serving as the smaller forts that were also defenses on the outskirts of the bigger forts. So we get to the first phase for this battle of Khaybar. So the first objective was to capture Fort Ta'in, and the Muslims attacked Fort Ta'in, and this is one of these smaller forts on the outside, on the outskirts of the city of Khaybar. And it was a short siege. And the Muslims captured that one, got their supplies, got their food, got their provisions and weapons, etc. And also, not in terms of physical gain, there was also mental gain. The morale of the army was boosted because, we accomplished this thing, we captured this fort, we took over the enemy base, and from there they could re-establish themselves and move forward on to the next target. And so they assaulted and attacked Fort Sa'ib ibn Mu'adh. And again, another fort that was on the outskirts of the area of Khaybar, and they captured that one. And this one in particular was known for its grain and its dates. And this was a crucial point because all of these food supplies sustained this raid on Khaybar. It sustained all the Muslims and it sustained the army that they can attack Khaybar and continue with the siege. This battle, however, this siege of the fort of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh was a bit tougher than Na'im, but they captured it and gained access to again those food supplies and those weapons, again weakening further Khaybar's defenses and boosting the morale of the Muslims, boosting the energy of the Muslims because they're making progress and they're winning. So phase one was to capture those smaller forts on the outskirts of Khaybar, which the Muslims did. And it didn't require as much effort. And these forts were close to farmland, so they were able to cut off the supplies to the other bigger forts inland, which enabled the Muslims, because they had now more food, more weapons, more supplies, it enabled them to prepare for assaults on the larger fortresses. So this is now when we begin phase two of the siege of Khaybar. So we're going to go to the fort of Natat. And this one, as I said, was one of the largest and strongest of Khaybar's forts and defenses. And how the Muslims took it over was by first cutting off any supplies to this fort. So this fort had no outside help, and they had to only rely on whatever they had inside their four walls. And the provisions could only last for so long. As well as now defending against the Muslims who were, launching several attacks and assaults over a period of time. And this siege, however, lasted a few days. And the Muslims were now using their different siege equipment like battering rams and ladders, etc. But eventually the Muslims won and conquered it. This fort of Natal again, with all of these supplies, weaponry, the Muslims conquered that and You can only imagine how the Muslims might be feeling, knowing that victory is so near. So just before we get to the final fort, Al-Qamus, which was the largest and the most well-fortified and the most well-defended of the forts of Khaybar, before the fort of Qamus, Marhab, that Jewish warrior that I mentioned, he challenged any Muslim warrior to single combat. So just before we get into this, I need to mention that the Muslims were winning and capturing the forts one by one instead. But they were struggling with Qamus because it was the biggest, it was the strongest, it had, the best everything. And the Muslims were struggling. Umar ibn Khattab, he was chosen to lead a garrison against them, he failed. And then another Sahaba, and another Sahaba, a few well-known Sahaba were, leading assaults against his fort, but no success. And then one day, the Prophet during this battle said, I'm going to choose someone from among you who loves me very much, who will lead us to victory. And that person was none other than Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. So Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu was the one who led this final siege against this final fortress of Khaybar. So coming back to Marhab, who challenged any Muslim warrior to single combat, right? Ali ibn Abi Talib was the one who accepted this challenge. As we mentioned, Marhab was known for his, strength and his ability in battle. He was feared because he was a really good warrior. But in the duel between Marhab and Sayyidina Ali, it's probably winner Sayyidina Ali won. Sayyidina Ali was also, I would say, perhaps underrated and undermined among the warriors of the Sahaba and among, the other non-Muslims who looked down upon the Muslim army. Sayyidina Ali was one of the most fiercest in battle. And his famous sword, Dhul Fiqar, you might be familiar with, it was a sword that kind of split towards the end. And of course, he completely annihilated and he destroyed Marhab and he won. And this was a major turning point in the battle. Because Marhab, think about it mentally, for the Jews, Marhab was the pinnacle of fighting and the pinnacle of what it means to be a warrior. It was the best. So to see your best man destroyed mentally, imagine what that done to the Jewish forces. And now we just see Ali who's coming with all of his strength and velocity, just completely overwhelming Marhab. It really shook the Jewish tribes that were in this final fort to the core. And so, with Marhab defeated also, we can imagine for the Muslims, Sayyidina Ali being the best Jewish fighter that there was in this fort of Khaybar. The Muslims were even more confident that the victory was going to come soon. And so they launched an all-out assault against this fort of Al-Qamus, which was the last and the strongest of these forts in Khaybar. And Sayyidina Ali was given this banner of leadership by the Prophet to lead this attack. And there is this famous story that we know of Sayyidina Ali who broke open or ripped the door of this fort of Khaybar off its hinges with physical strength. He just took the door off his hinges. And it's not like our 2-meter doors that we have here in our homes. This is the door of a fort, it's the door of a castle, much bigger than the doors of this masjid. Right? I've saw some posts out there speaking about this, and they said that the door was like 900 kilograms, and all of these crazy numbers, just like to emphasize the strength of Sayyidina Ali in that moment. But to also just mention another thing regarding Sayyidina Ali, he could rip the door off this fort of the Battle of Khaybar without any complaints, without any help. But when his wife, Fatima the daughter of the Prophet, his wife, when she passed away, he could barely lift the beer, or as we say, the cattle. But he could barely lift it, and he asked the Sahaba, help me. The weight of his wife, Fatima passing away was something he could not bear, but yet he could rip off the door of one of the fortresses of Khaybar. It's something for us to think about as men regarding our women and our wives and the other hand. So, you know, with Sheikh Raihan defeating Marham and opening this door off, the Muslims breached the defenses of this final fortress, and whoever was inside, they surrendered. One after another, these fortresses of Khaybar that belonged to the Jews, they were being taken over. They were being completely annihilated. And soon, obviously, was followed total Jewish surrender. So after all those major forts fell, the Jewish tribes of Khaybar, they realized there was no way that they were going to win against the Muslim army and the Muslim forces, and they pleaded for negotiations. And so the Jewish leaders, they proposed a surrender. And part of the surrender, one of the conditions that they suggested was that we will completely surrender and be under your rule, but can we still live on the land? And in exchange, they'll give over half of all the agricultural produce to Mali. The reason being, they lived on that land for generations. They know how to till the land, they know how to cultivate the land, they know how the land works and changes with seasons. They know how best to utilize and get crops from the land. And this agreement was accepted by the Prophet because it also ensured a steady income, a steady source of food and supplies and wealth for the Muslim community. And so the Jewish tribes of Khaybar, they then agreed to live under the Muslim rule, paying a tax at that time known as Kharaj, which was half of whatever produce they got from their land. And in return, they were allowed to stay on their land peacefully and live under the Muslim protection. And this agreement is, it's obvious it was beneficial for both sides. The Muslims gained a significant economic boost, as well as another stronghold to the north, and the Jews, they were spared from exile and death, which is good under any circumstances. So, with this economic gain for the Muslims and the Muslim community, with this increase in the wealth of resources, it helped the Muslim community in Medina, the economy grow, and it also strengthened the Muslim authority. So politically speaking, anyone who had some sort of alliance or negotiation or whatever agreement with Khaybar, they had to recognize the Muslims' authority and power in the area. They had to recognize the presence of the Muslims and the Muhammad in the area. It totally solidified the Muslim control over that northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And it also weakened at the same time any influence of any hostile tribes against the Muslims. And not only that, the military repercussions from this was, it not only demonstrated the effectiveness of the Muslim army in siege warfare, obviously the skill that they would use later in other campaigns, including the conquest of Makkah and the Battle of Tabuk, and also the siege of Taif. But it also gave them a lot of experience so that when they came to those future battles, they would know how best to deal with that happening. So after that battle, Khaybar was a significant point for the Muslims, who had just entered into a peace treaty agreement with Quraysh and had now taken over Khaybar, which was known in the area for its land but also for its military might. The diplomatic influence, if you want to look at it also, of the Nabi Muhammad and the Muslims was also expanded. So the nearby tribes also who had alliances with Khaybar obviously knew, okay, we don't have anything with Khaybar anymore, we have now something with Muslims. And those who had no agreements with anyone had to acknowledge the Muslims' power and prowess and their authority and might in the area, in exchange for peace and protection, which obviously marked this beginning of diplomatic dominance in the northern part of Arabia. And so that also now shifted focus for the Muslims, because if they could conquer Khaybar, then they could eventually conquer Mecca. So with Khaybar, pacified and subdued, and the other hostile tribes also subdued, the Prophet Muhammad also, with his additional resources, was able to plan and started planning for an eventual conquest of Mecca, which happened to take place in the following year based on other criteria due to Quraysh breaking the treaty. So the victory at Khaybar paved the way for the expansion of this Islamic state and the eventual submission of Quraysh, and it strengthened the Muslim army greatly. Not only that, right? But one other thing that we have to notice is that during this time, in and around the Battle of Khaybar taking place in the month of Safar in the 7th year of the Hijrah, the Nabi Muhammad sent out messengers and emissaries to the neighboring kingdoms and dynasties. So he sent out letters and emissaries and messages to the king of Persia and to King Najashi in Abyssinia and to a king in Ethiopia and to the ruler of Egypt at the time and to Heraclius, the leader of the Byzantine Empire. So the expansion of Medina physically happened on the ground in the gained Khaybar as well. But also, if you want to look at the political side of things, then Muhammad was also not able to speak to the kings and rulers of the neighboring empires. And most of them received the message well. Did not accept the message, did not accept Islam, but they received it well. And I say that because they responded, most of them, with sending gifts and well wishes and thanks and praise to the Nabi Muhammad. The only one who didn't, we can definitely say, was the king of Persia. I think his name was Chusros. He tore up the letter, he was completely adamant and defiant, and he refused Islam completely. And then it was revealed that he was killed by his own son, who then accepted Islam sometime after that. But to just summarize again, that this Battle of Khaybar was a significant gain and a momentous occasion for the Muslims, because it paved the way for their future successes in battle. It also enabled them to interact on the international political stage, if you want to look at it in that light as well, where they were able to interact with some sort of authority, with some sort of power, with some sort of might, and in a sense challenge the other neighboring empires of Egypt and Abyssinia and Rome and Persia, who had to acknowledge, and they did, the presence of the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They had to acknowledge this growing empire of Islam in the middle of the desert, with all the Arabia. So inshallah, next week when we come back, we'll be looking at the violation of the treaty of Hudaybiyah, this treaty between the Muslims and Quraysh. And we're going to look at the things that led up to that moment and what actually happened that this agreement was broken. Mind you, it was broken by Quraysh. The Muslims were, very grateful and enjoyed the benefits and the bounties and the blessings from this treaty. But inshallah, next week we'll be looking at what went down that broke this peace treaty and how after that the Muslims capitalized on that moment and conquered Mecca soon after, inshallah. So if there are no questions or comments or queries, inshallah, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming tonight. Today I'll ask one question.
Just wondering, are they considering, the history of Muslims and the background and the victories and the context of where Islam finds itself today, are there any learnings, that can be applied from that history, from that history, to
because the object of the seerah is not to be a nice story to tell. It's a lived example to try to implement where possible. And regarding the tactics in battles, at that time I would say it's very different to what we can apply now. Technology advancement, civilizations have grown, population sizes have grown. So regarding those battles, in particular the Battle of Khaybar, one thing I think that we can definitely take from it is that alliances with non-Muslims in particular are not alliances that can be fully trusted. Because at one point or another, no Muslim in history, in our Islamic history, has broken an alliance as far as we know within the Seerah. Of all the battles that we've looked at, of all the agreements that we've gone through, there's always been a non-Muslim that has broken this agreement. So I think maybe that's a starting point for us to look at our relations and our agreements with non-Muslims, particularly regarding the Middle East. With Muslims, it's another discussion on its own that we can maybe entertain another time. But with non-Muslims, I think at this point, especially considering the conflict and the killing and the genocide happening in Palestine, to trust an Israeli, so to say, would be the dumbest thing he could do. Because the Seerah has examples where not Israelis but Jews have betrayed the Muslims, where non-Muslim Arabs have betrayed the Muslims. So to trust a non-Muslim is one thing, but to trust a non-Muslim that you know is committing unthinkable things would be more absurd. To have alliances still with people who have alliances with the Israelis would be just as absurd. What did I say? The enemy of my friend is my enemy, but the friend of my enemy is also my friend. But if you're friends with everybody, then you're not really helping anyone. You essentially become the enemy of everyone at the end of the day as well. So that is something that I would feel much more comfortable looking into for alcohol. And maybe we can have another discussion next week on that topic. And maybe we can all think about some things or do some research. Because these Seerah classes, as much as it is a lecture from here where my throat ends up drying out, I would love for it to also be some sort of discussion where we can share ideas related to the Seerah and look for places where we can implement parts of the Seerah. Because another thing of the Seerah is to implement all of it at the same time is impossible. And you can't, because there are just some situations that you will never live or experience that are the same. So to implement what we can and stay consistent with that is at the end of the day the ultimate goal, to slowly build implementing all these things. Because Medina wasn't built in a day. The Muslim army didn't grow to 30,000 in the Battle of Tabuk in a day. They started with 313 in the Battle of Badr, and within 10 years grew to 30,000. So us implementing of the Sunnah and the Seerah not going to happen just like that. It's going to take us at least 10 years, inshallah. Yes, please.
Exactly. Right? So that is something to the and the half of the farmer or the people or the Muslims that would come from themselves, because they do it by themselves from these spoke about it.
Allah guided the Sami and our brothers and sisters in Palestine and